So I wanted to ask you, you're always, I'm always like asking you, Aaron, what's the problem with the world? Why is everyone so crazy? And then all my questions, like any sort of variation from that, somehow it brings you to the conclusion that it's because of the family unit has dissolved.
Yeah,
And I wanted to get some clarification of what you mean by that.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because every time we talk about this, it seems like we come to the same conclusion with like very slightly different results.
Yeah.
I strongly believe so. Take it from the top down.
Okay.
You have, I don't know, the federal government, right? The federal government can't work if state governments don't work. So then you go to the state government.
Yep.
State governments don't work if the city government doesn't work, and then you go all the way down the line. Well, what's the most basic quote unquote government of people, and that's the family structure. So if the family structure isn't there, if there aren't fathers in the homes, if there aren't two parents raising children, all of that, then there won't be a community that can build a city, that can build a state, that can build a country, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think you have to take it down to its most basic atomistic structure, and that's the family unit.
So this is kind of that whole basic sort of Jordan Peterson clean your room first sort of philosophy.
Sort of that philosophy, at least from what I've seen, is more about before you point out the I don't know, the twig in someone else's eye, address the log in yours, that type of thing. And it's, kind of the idea of also just like start small and like do something that can fix your life moving forward. My this is, I would say, a little bit more along the line of identifying where where change can take place on a large structure. And change doesn't take place at the top. It never will. You try and in any time the federal government specifically, any federal government tries to do top-down change, it always has good intentions, but it will always have undue consequences because it has to start from the lowest common denominator and move up. At least that's how I've seen it throughout my life. I don't know. What do you think about that? I know you disagree slightly. I know you typically say that it's more community, so one level up from family.
I mean, I'd say it's all about the individual. Um, but I read this book, or at least most of the book. It's really boring. It's called Anti-Oedipus,
Okay.
and it's basically the antithesis to your whole argument here. Is
Hmm.
that basically in modern day psychology, we root a lot of our problems for mental disorders on our early relationships with our family, early members of our family and our family structure and things like that. And anti-Oedipus takes it from a different lens, as far as instead of analyzing things on that whole Freudian scale with the mother and father and child, it's analyzing things on a cultural, individual, family, puts everything together. And it kind of says that, hey, the family is not the cause of all of our mental disorders. But of course, that's kind of a side tangent to what I like actually think about this. In that I think that the family structure is important, but what's more important is that you have some kind of is that everyone has some kind of one of a father figure and two a mother figure, I guess. And I'd say even a step further from that is that if you have an even bigger extended family of individuals, such as your uncles and aunts and grandparents and things like that, then I think that would make for a better society. Because if you don't have that, like, you come from a big family, right?
Yeah.
And there's sort of, when you're in a big family, there's sort of a shared parenting going on. It's not just your parents. You have your grandparents, you have your uncles and aunts, you have your older siblings, you have your, I guess in a sense, you have your teachers, but that's kind of beyond what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I see what you're saying is that it extends beyond the family, which I don't disagree with. I would say I would say that I agree with that sentiment, and you could even take it farther. You could say that, I mean, you were relating it, it sounds like, to mental illness. which you could take that farther from the
Yep.
family to the community and just all the way out. You could bring in friends, teachers, political figures. You could kind of go all the way down the line. My point is that it starts with the mother and father, or I guess if you're
Yep.
in a not typical family, a mother and mother, father, father, whatever, it doesn't matter. It starts with the people who raised you, and it starts with your siblings. Like that
Yep.
is the most basic structure.
I 100% agree with you there. I'm just thinking that, I mean, I'd say yes. A lot of our issue in our country is not just that the family unit has broken down, but also that a lot of families are just shit. And a lot of fathers are like,
Yeah. I mean that's true. That's
I
true.
mean,
Um, yeah.
there's a lack
I mean,
of, like, there's an alienation. Like, everyone's so alienated. We're always on our phones. We're kind of getting a lot of, we're getting raised by our teachers at school more than our own parents.
yeah, it's very strange. Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you look at the divorce rate, and it's 50% for first marriages, and then if you go beyond that, if you go to someone who's been within multiple marriages, it's even higher. I think it's like 65% or something, which is just insane because bringing children into that, and now you're raising a family, the instability that a child feels. I mean, thankfully, I never had to deal with
Same.
my parents splitting, but I can only imagine the instability that comes along with uh something as simple as being with your mom for the first couple of days of the week, and then driving across town and being with your dad. Like that's not the structure that a child needs in order to grow into a healthy adult. So it's things like that you need to, I say you, that society needs to figure out how to resolve before we can address larger issues.
So do you think, as far as, well, I watched this documentary years ago in college about uh, marriages in India, like arranged marriages, and how so many of them are, the percentage success rate of those marriages are a lot higher than American marriages. But I think part of the reason for that is their culture, where they're
Yes.
very strongly for the family unit, right? The family unit is a
Hmm.
very important thing in India. Like, family is super important in their culture.
Hmm.
Whereas in America, I think it's sort of hyper individualist. And I think part of that, I don't know what your opinion on this is, but I think part of that is leading to the divorce rate, where people kind of, it's almost like self-centered in a way, where like, oh, like, I'm not happy, so I don't want to be with this person anymore, instead of being like, you know, I'm not happy, but I'm sure I can persevere and make it work and compromise. And, like, for my children, whatever. Obviously, a lot of people have like bad situations where they're with someone abusive, um,
Hmm.
but probably the most likely scenario is that most marriages, there's not any abuse, and
Hmm.
they just start not liking each other, basically.
I think that's what it comes down to. I'm not married yet. I do plan to be, but I feel like
We're
I'm,
getting there.
yeah, right. I feel like I observe people pretty well, and from what I have seen, is that people make a choice to not love every single day, and that's what it seems like it comes down to a lot. So if you stop making that choice, and like I agree with you, there's obviously situations of abuse, affairs, things like that, which I think it's personally reasonable, completely reasonable to get a divorce to separate yourself from that situation. But in situations where that's not happening, I would say that you have made a bond to this person. And in very real senses, you've also made a contract with this person. So I think that you should do everything that you can in your power to not break that contract. But yeah, going to what you're saying about Indian culture, for instance, you'll see that here as well. You don't see it as much in less religious places, but like for instance, I come from the South. I was very raised very religiously. So for us, we always heard about people getting divorced, for instance. But if
Yeah.
it was someone in our church, it was like, oh my God, they're getting a divorce. Do you know what's going on? Like it must be horrible. Like it was scandalous, right? Like
Yeah,
that's the kind of place I grew up in. I didn't even know someone who got divorced until I was, I don't know, at least late teenage
that's
years.
crazy.
So yeah, so it's a very different situation. The US is a huge country. I tend to believe that in general, people should shy away from divorce in almost every scenario. The exceptions being, again, in my personal belief, the exceptions being affairs and abuse. Um, but yeah, I think in every other instance, you have such a huge responsibility to keeping a marriage together, especially if children are involved, but also just for the sake of, like I said, the most atomic governmental structure of our society.